Welcome, and thank you for joining us for our third annual Prenatal to 3 Research to Policy Summit. This event is an opportunity to recognize and celebrate the tremendous progress that states have made over this past year in implementing policies that are proven to positively impact the health and well-being of our infants and toddlers and their parents. I'm Cynthia Osborne, and I have the privilege of directing the Prenatal to 3 Policy Impact Center at Vanderbilt University. And the whole purpose of the Policy Impact Center is to be a resource for state leaders to help you identify and implement the most effective policies that create more equitable environments and help children thrive from the start. We know that you, as state policy leaders and advocates, want to implement evidence-based policies that will actually make a difference in the lives of the children and families in your state. But the evidence of what really works is difficult to find. So, we did the work for you. We turned to the research and we read thousands of articles and we carefully reviewed hundreds of the most rigorous studies that have been conducted to learn which state policies have the largest impact on improving the health and well-being of infants and toddlers and their parents. And these are the policies and strategies that we've included in the roadmap. So today, we are excited to share with you our third annual Prenatal to 3 State Policy Roadmap. It's a guide for states not only to understand how your children and families are doing, but how state policy choices can help them to do better. In 2020, we unveiled the 5 policies and 6 strategies that our comprehensive reviews of most rigorous research found to be the most effective at creating the conditions in which children thrive. Now, we are continuously working to build the evidence base, and we'll add new policies or strategies to the roadmap as more evidence becomes available. But as a refresher for those who have seen the roadmap, or an introduction to those who are joining us for the first time, I'd like to share with you what we've learned so far. For the 5 policies, the research shows that expanding income eligibility for health insurance through expanding Medicaid leads to healthier birth outcomes and reduced financial hardships that can be caused by out-of-pocket health care expenses. Second, implementing a bundle of policies to reduce administrative burdens increases eligible families' access to SNAP. Now, reducing administrative burdens is one of the simplest and most cost-effective policies that states can implement. It often doesn't require legislative action and can be done through administrative or regulatory changes. And we use the example of SNAP, which is the most effective nutritional program that we have in this country. And it is one in which the research is clear on how to increase access to this important benefit among eligible families. So third is a paid family leave program that provides a minimum of 6 weeks of paid leave from work following the birth, adoption, or placement of a child in foster care. And this is one of the most pro-work and pro-family policies that exists. It increases the likelihood that the parent will return to work. It substantially increases household income and reduces poverty. Access to paid leave also improves the mother's physical and emotional health. It increases bonding between the parent and the child, and it leads to improved child outcomes, including reductions in severe head trauma. So fourth is a state minimum wage that's at least $10 an hour. It not only increases household resources and reduces poverty with little to no negative impact on employment, it also leads to healthier birth outcomes. It leads to lower levels of child neglect and improved child health outcomes, which have beneficial impacts throughout the children's school years. So finally is a state earned income tax credit that's refundable and at least 10% of the federal EITC. This policy substantially boosts employment and household resources, and surprisingly, it's one of the most effective policies that we have to reduce disparities in adverse birth outcomes. So for the 6 strategies, research shows us this: comprehensive screening and referral programs that identify the specific needs of children and families and connects them to those needed services. They increase families' access to community services. They also increase the likelihood that children will attend their well visits, enroll in higher quality childcare settings, receive their immunizations on time, And children are less likely to be placed in the wrong sleep position or to have to visit the emergency department. Childcare subsidies that make access to high-quality childcare more affordable for working parents leads to an increase in employment and in greater stability in childcare arrangements. As we all know, subsidies are a critical element to our economy by allowing parents to actually work. Group prenatal care models that provide more social support and services to expectant parents lead to an increase in the likelihood of adequate prenatal care, to better mental health for the new parent, and it increases the initiation of breastfeeding. Our evidence-based home visiting programs build new parents' skills and knowledge of child development and of healthy parenting practices. And our Early Head Start, now that promotes healthy social, emotional, cognitive, and physical development in young children. It assists parents in developing positive parenting skills and moving towards self-sufficiency, and it brings together community partners and resources to provide families with comprehensive services and supports. And finally, the early intervention, or Part C services, can improve young children's cognitive development, language and communication skills, their behavior, their motor skills, and it reduces the children's need for services as they get older. So altogether, these 11 evidence-based solutions provide a combination of broad-based economic and family supports and more targeted interventions that create the conditions in which children thrive from the start. We are excited to have thousands of you join us today to celebrate the progress that states have made this past year in implementing these policies and strategies that we know will positively impact children and families. We're also thrilled to be joined by several state policy leaders who will share why they believe investing in our youngest children is a good investment and how important it is for policy leaders to champion policies that have a strong evidence base. Today, I hope that you walk away from this event with 3 key points in mind. First, we know what works. If you want to positively impact the lives of children and families, this roadmap provides a clear path toward implementing policies that work. Second, variation in state policy choices leads to a patchwork of benefits and services for families, which leads to wide variation in child well-being across this country. Most of us read the incredible report that Child Trends produced and that Jason DeParle wrote about regarding the substantial declines in child poverty over the past several decades. They attribute these declines to enhancements in social policies over this time period. But I would add to their important work by reminding us that federal policies apply to all children and families similarly, but it is state policy choices, including how states implement federal policies, that lead to wide variation in child poverty rates and other critical measures of health and well-being across the states. So the third point is that there is no magic bullet. There is not one policy or one program that can do it all. For children to truly thrive, we need a comprehensive system of support that is equitable and effective. And our roadmap provides a guide on how to create this system of care. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for all of the work that you do to improve the lives of infants and toddlers and their parents. Now, let's look more closely at that roadmap. So this morning, you should have received a link to our updated Prenatal to 3 state policy roadmap. With thousands of you opening the roadmap at the same time, it is possible that we will break the internet again this year, but trust me, it's worth it. And this year, we have added new state summaries that provide a snapshot of your state's policy progress and how you can strengthen your system of support for children and families. We've also added in a simulation to illustrate how the roadmap policies and strategies interact to provide resources to working parents in each state. Now, as a bit of background for those of you who may be less familiar with the roadmap, it builds on the science of the developing child that tells us that the prenatal to age 3 period is the most rapid and sensitive period of development. Often people talk about investing in early childhood so that kids are prepared for school and ready to learn. Well, I have a secret for you. We are born learning, and we will learn more in the first 3 years than in any other period of our lives. But what we learn and whether we reach our optimal health and well-being depends on the conditions we are exposed to in these earliest years. Children who are exposed to safe, stable, stimulating, and nurturing environments during the prenatal to 3 period are set on a path for optimal brain and body development. However, if we experience trauma or chronic adversity in this sensitive developmental period, such as chronic poverty or exposure to violence or racism, it can cause neurological, physiological, and social damage to the developing brain and body systems that can have lifelong consequences for the individual as well as society. As I said, the science could not be clearer about the conditions that children need to thrive from the start. And our team translated the science into 8 prenatal to 3 policy goals that all states should strive to achieve. So we know that families need access to the benefits and services for which they're eligible. Parents need to be able to work and care for their children. Families need stability in their resources, including food security, adequate housing, and stable and sufficient incomes. And children need to be born healthy to healthy parents, taking into consideration both the physical and mental health needs. And parents need the skills and knowledge of children's development to engage in those nurturing behaviors with their children that we know are the key to promoting healthy brain and body development. And when children are not with their parents, they also need to be in high-quality nurturing environments. And importantly, we need to screen children to know that they are on track for healthy development. And when children experience a developmental delay, we need to get them connected to the services that they need to get them back on track to optimal health and well-being. And the purpose of this roadmap is to share with you what rigorous research shows are the most effective policies and strategies that states can implement to create those conditions and meet those 8 policy goals. State policy leaders have been asking for this evidence so that they can implement what works. And this roadmap helps remove the guesswork for you, and it guides state policy leaders to make evidence-based choices. So I invite you now to have a look at the new 2022 Prenatal to 3 State Policy Roadmap.
The Prenatal to 3 State Policy Roadmap is a guide for state leaders to help them develop and implement the most effective policies and strategies that create a stronger and more equitable system of support for infants and toddlers and their parents. Based on comprehensive reviews of the most rigorous evidence available, the State Policy Roadmap identifies 5 effective policies and 6 effective strategies that help to create the conditions in which children thrive. In addition to providing guidance on what works, the roadmap monitors states' annual progress toward adopting and fully implementing these effective state actions, and measures the well-being of infants and toddlers in each state. You can explore the U.S. Roadmap, which provides a summary of all states' progress and well-being, or explore any individual state and the District of Columbia by using the drop-down menu. The U.S. Roadmap begins with a summary page. It shows the number of states that have fully implemented each of the effective policies, as well as the states that are leading the way in implementing the effective strategies. The summary also briefly highlights the legislative and administrative activity states engage in over the last year toward policy adoption. Scroll down to see how the 8 science-driven prenatal to 3 policy goals align with the 5 effective roadmap policies and 6 effective strategies. Each column represents one of the 8 policy goals, and the shaded circles in each row indicate that the policy or strategy positively impacts that goal and enhances the well-being of infants, toddlers, and their parents. The framework also illustrates the child and family outcome measures that are associated with each policy goal, which we are tracking over time. In addition to providing information on what works, the State Policy Roadmap tracks states' progress toward adopting and implementing the effective policies. To date, 6 states have fully implemented all 5 of the roadmap policies, and another 16 states have implemented at least 3. Over time, the hope is that all states fully implement all 5 effective policies. Over the past year, 8 states fully implemented at least one new policy this year: Connecticut, Delaware, Kentucky, Indiana, Maryland, Nevada, Washington, and Virginia implemented too. This year, for the first time, we have included our simulation of how policy choices impact family resources across states within the roadmap, illustrating the wide variation across states. These analyses also highlight how the level of resources available vary across states based on two other important policy choices: Medicaid expansion and a paid family leave program of at least 6 weeks. The U.S. Roadmap summary page also shows how opportunities and outcomes vary considerably for infants and toddlers across states. These measures help states to set priorities for where to begin to build a stronger and more equitable prenatal to 3 system of support. More detailed information is available for each effective policy and strategy, and you can select the one that interests you. Each policy profile begins with a snapshot of the policy goals that it impacts, the states that have fully implemented the policy, and a brief summary of the progress states have made toward adopting the policy in the past year. Strategy profiles are similar, except that, in the absence of clear guidelines on legislative or regulatory actions a state can take to garner the impacts at a statewide level, the roadmap provides state leaders that are implementing evidence-based programs and making them accessible to a significant number of families. Each policy and strategy also includes a summary of associated outcomes. This is where you can go to find examples of the positive impact the policy can have on prenatal to 3 policy goals, such as healthy and equitable births and a parent's ability to work. For example, this table indicates that a paid family leave policy of at least 6 weeks has been shown to lead an average increase of $3,400 in household income among mothers of 1-year-olds and an 8 percentage point increase in maternal labor force participation in the months surrounding birth, among many other things. In addition, the roadmap provides information on the legislative and administrative activities states engage in toward policy adoption, including whether the state introduced legislation, if that legislation met the roadmap threshold, and if it was enacted. We know that policy change often takes time, and that progress is often made even if the policy is not fully implemented. Hover over a state for details on its legislative activity. Policies can vary considerably across states, so the roadmap provides details on how each state implements a given policy. Paid family leave policies, for example, vary in the weeks offered, the portion of wages workers receive, funding mechanisms, and more. Each state has its own page, providing a snapshot of the policies the state has fully implemented, and indicates with a star the strategies on which the state is considered a leader. The state roadmap provides details on how each state compares to others in terms of policy and strategy implementation and aligned child and parent outcome measures. For example, the Connecticut roadmap indicates that it is one of 25 states that is fully implementing a minimum wage of $10 or greater. Connecticut's minimum wage is currently $14 an hour. Higher minimum wages should reduce the percentage of children who have at least one full-time working parent but are still living near poverty. In Connecticut, 13.4% of children have a working parent and are still living near poverty. Compared to other states, this is relatively low, especially compared to the poorest performing states where more than 1/3 of children with a full-time working parent are still living near poverty. The state roadmap also provides details on how state policy choices impact a family's annual resources and how it compares to other states. Connecticut is ranked 19 out of 51 states. Data are provided illustrating the range on 20 outcome measures of child and family well-being between the state in which children and their parents are faring the best and the state in which they are faring the worst, and demonstrates where the state fits within that range. These data can help state leaders prioritize their prenatal to 3 policy goals and track the well-being of children and families. Finally, each state profile includes demographic characteristics. These data are a useful way to understand the population of infants and toddlers in your state, the unique needs they may have, and whether the needs are similar by race and ethnicity, geography, and socioeconomic status. The roadmap also provides comparisons of outcome measures across all states and by race and ethnic group for each of the 20 outcome measures. The goal is to create a stronger and more equitable system of support for infants and toddlers, so we should see reductions in race and ethnic disparities in these measures as more states implement the roadmap policies and strategies. The final section of the roadmap provides information on the demographic characteristics of infants and toddlers and their parents. Where possible, the information is disaggregated by race and ethnicity. For detailed information on all of the data used in the roadmap and our sources, visit the Methods and Sources page. The Prenatal to 3 State Policy Roadmap builds on the science of the developing child and identifies the 11 most effective investments that states can make to empower parents and foster the conditions in which children thrive from the start. This guide for state leaders also illustrates the progress that states are making toward implementing the effective solutions, and it allows state leaders to monitor the well-being of infants and toddlers over time.
Wow. Let's be honest, that was a lot, and we just barely scratched the surface. So, how should you dig into all of this information? Well, so one option is that you can just sit down with a hot cup of tea or a beverage of your choice and read it all from start to finish. The US summary, your state summary page, the 11 profiles of each of the effective policies and strategies, the demos and the outcomes, and of course, methods and sources. But it honestly does not take that long to read the whole thing, and you'll feel like a policy expert when you're all finished, I promise. But as a professor, I know that this is very unlikely unless I give you a test, which I won't yet. But joking aside, we recognize that states have different priorities and political contexts, and the roadmap is designed to help you meet the goals you have for your state. So the best place to begin is to prioritize your policy goals. You may already have specific policy goals in mind, or you may begin by looking at how your children and families in your state are faring and determine where you're making progress and where you're lagging on key measures of health and well-being. And you can find a brief overview of this information in your state summary. We're providing an example using Tennessee's summary page, which is now the center's new home state. And we identified a set of outcome measures that are aligned to each of the 8 prenatal to 3 policy goals that tell us how children and families are faring in your state compared to other states. For example, the roadmap indicates that 10.9% of babies in Tennessee are born preterm or before the 37th week of gestation. And the state ranks 41st out of 51 states on this measure. Being born preterm is associated with a host of negative outcomes for children that can last a lifetime. So Tennessee should be concerned that nearly 1 out of 10 babies experience this adversity. By using the roadmap framework, leaders in Tennessee can determine the most effective policy options that reduce the rate of preterm births and promote healthier birth outcomes. The roadmap framework, which can be found in the U.S. summary section of the roadmap, illustrates how the outcome measures and the state policy goals and the effective policy solutions align. Each of the columns represents one of the 8 policy goals, and it indicates the outcome measures that are associated with that goal. The colored dots indicate which of the roadmap policies and strategies positively impact each goal. And by using the framework, Tennessee leaders will find that preterm birth outcomes are aligned to the policy goal of healthy and equitable births, and that there are 3 policy options proven to positively impact that goal, including Medicaid expansion, a minimum wage of at least $10 an hour, and a refundable state earned income tax credit that's at least 10% of the federal EITC. People are often surprised that these broader economic supports have a larger impact on improving birth outcomes than more targeted interventions. But reducing the stress associated with income instability and providing access to healthcare address the root causes of adverse birth outcomes. So the state's leaders could then navigate to the policy profile sections of the roadmap to gather clear guidance on implementation to ultimately improve birth outcomes in the state. Again, the roadmap is designed to be a tool for you to adopt and implement the most effective policies and strategies that meet your policy goals. So now it's time to celebrate states' progress. It's time to recognize and celebrate the tremendous progress that many states made this past year in adopting and implementing at least one of the roadmap policies. Later in this event, we'll celebrate the state leaders who serve as exemplars to other states on how to implement the effective strategies. But for now, let's focus on policies. So to begin, I want to recognize two states, Connecticut and Washington, who have now implemented all 5 of the effective roadmap policies. Congratulations to the policy leaders and advocates in those states for the incredible efforts over many years that you have put into making this happen, and to the children and families who will benefit. This year, Connecticut fully implemented its 12-week paid family leave program that it enacted in 2019. And so that's what's brought it to a 5 out of 5. The state had previously implemented the other 4 policies. It was one of the 6 original states to expand Medicaid, and it has implemented policies to reduce the administrative burden for SNAP for several years. The state's minimum wage is $14 an hour, and this year it enacted legislation to even expand its refundable EITC from 30.5% of the federal credit to 41.5% of the federal credit beginning in tax year 2023. So well done, Connecticut. Washington has also now fully implemented all 5 roadmap policies by funding its working family tax credit, a tax refund that's modeled after the EITC. Washington enacted the policy in 2008, but it didn't fund it at that time. And this year, it became the first and only state who doesn't have an income tax to implement a state-earned income tax credit, which proves that it's possible to do. Families in Washington also benefit from the other 4 roadmap policies. Like Connecticut, Washington was one of the original 6 states to expand Medicaid, and the state makes it relatively easy for families to access SNAP. It offers 12 weeks of paid family leave and a minimum wage of nearly $14.50 an hour. Washington is truly implementing broad-based economic and family supports that really help children to thrive from the start. Congratulations. These 2 states now joined California, the District of Columbia, Massachusetts, and New Jersey in fully implementing all 5 roadmap policies. When we launched our roadmap in 2020, there were only 3 states that had implemented all 5, and now there are 6. But as you can see from this graphic, there's a huge variation across the country in the number of effective policies that states have implemented. 10 states have fully implemented 4 out of 5 of the effective policies, which is really impressive. And among those states, we know that Oregon and Rhode Island will fully implement all 5 effective policies next year when they implement their paid family leave programs. And there could be other states as well. But there are 9 states that have implemented only 1 of the effective policies, and there are 6 that have not implemented any of them. This graphic really illustrates how much work we have to do to ensure that all of our children live in environments in which they thrive. In this country, the state in which you are born has a huge impact on your health and well-being because of variation in state policy choices. There's also considerable variation in terms of which policies are being implemented widely. As you can see, 39 states have fully implemented Medicaid expansion, whereas only 7 states have fully implemented a paid family leave program of a minimum of 6 weeks. And only approximately half of states have implemented a minimum wage of at least $10 an hour or a refundable EITC of at least 10% of the federal credit. And as I said earlier, there is no magic bullet. It is the combination of all of these policies that will create the system of support in which children can thrive from the start. However, we certainly want to recognize that with the exception of Medicaid expansion, there was considerable progress this year in fully implementing these roadmap policies. Kentucky and Maryland increased their SNAP recertification interval from 6 to 12 months, making it easier for families to access this important benefit. And as I mentioned earlier, Connecticut fully implemented its 12-week paid family leave program, but importantly, Maryland and Delaware enacted 12-week paid family leave programs that will be implemented in a few years, bringing the total to 12 states who are currently implementing a paid family leave program at least 6 weeks, or that will do so in the next few years. And hopefully more states are going to follow. Low-wage workers in Delaware, Nevada, and Virginia all saw their wages increase to a minimum of $10 an hour this past year. All 3 states passed this $10 threshold based on previously scheduled increase, and at least 3 more states, Michigan, Ohio, and South Dakota, have increases scheduled to their minimum wages that will push them over the $10 threshold next year. Also, a special recognition to Hawaii that passed legislation to incrementally increase the state's minimum wage to $18 per hour in 2028. Also, congratulations to working families in Indiana, Virginia, and Washington who will now have access to a refundable earned income tax credit that's equivalent to at least 10% of the federal credit. Indiana and Washington implemented previously enacted policies, and Virginia enacted and implemented legislation this year. Well done. So that's 8 states: Connecticut, Delaware, Indiana, Kentucky, Maryland, Nevada, Virginia, and Washington that implemented at least one of the roadmap policies, and Virginia fully implemented 2, both the state minimum wage and the EITC policies. Congratulations and well done. But in addition to Virginia, 5 additional states deserve special recognition for their progress on one or more of the roadmap policies this past year. California enacted policies to expand the benefits of both its paid family leave programs and its state earned income tax credit, which will become effective in a few years. And Connecticut fully implemented its 12-week paid family leave program, and it expanded the benefits of its state earned income tax credit. Delaware's minimum wage passed the $10 threshold, and it enacted a 12-week paid family leave program that will go into effect in 2026. Hawaii enacted legislation to expand its state minimum wage and to make its earned income tax credit refundable and permanent. And Maryland increased its SNAP recertification interval to 12 months and enacted a 12-week paid family leave program that will be implemented in 2025. It's truly impressive policy progress. Congratulations. But we know that policy adoption and implementation does not happen overnight. It can take several legislative sessions before a policy moves from introduction to adoption, and even longer before families can actually benefit from the legislative or administrative change. Therefore, we track as much of the legislative activity as we can to learn what might be on the horizon for children and families in many states. And we're excited to report that of the 12 states that have not expanded Medicaid yet, 11 considered legislation this past year to do so. And although no state was successful, in North Carolina, a Medicaid expansion bill passed the Senate, and there are still negotiations ongoing in the legislature. And we'll hear from Senator Bergen in a minute to tell us more about the status of the bill. And in South Dakota, voters will cast their ballots in November to consider whether to expand Medicaid. So it is possible that we will announce next year that 2 additional states expanded health insurance coverage to lower income individuals. In addition, to date, 31 states have taken steps to extend Medicaid coverage from 60 days postpartum to a full year following a child's birth. And this is critically important, given that a substantial portion of maternal deaths occur after the 60 days. And this will allow millions of new parents to maintain health coverage. There was also a great deal of legislative activity for paid family leave programs. As I said, Delaware and Maryland enacted 12-week paid family leave programs this year, and 21 other states introduced legislation this past session to adopt a statewide paid family leave program of at least 6 weeks. And 19 of those states introduced at least one bill that would provide up to 12 weeks of benefits when fully implemented. This amount of legislative activity illustrates how important this policy is to so many families. Now, no states passed legislation this past year to enact a state minimum wage of $10 or greater. However, Nebraska will vote on a ballot measure in November of this year to incrementally increase the state minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2026. The state would join 10 other states that are scheduled to increase their minimum wages to at least $15 an hour within the next few years. And importantly, Alaska, Rhode Island, and Tennessee enacted legislation this past year to make their minimum wage policies more inclusive by eliminating the sub-minimum wage for workers with disabilities. And 14 states that already offer a refundable EITC that's at least 10% of the federal credit push to expand their benefit levels and eligibility even further. And legislation passed in 7 of these states, including in Illinois and DC, that expanded eligibility for the EITC to workers with an I-10 number. And more than half of states that have not yet fully implemented EITC introduced legislation to expand their credits or offer a state EITC for the first time. So although unsuccessful, 9 states, in addition to Virginia and Hawaii, introduced legislation to adopt a refundable EITC that's at least 10% of the federal credit. Another 7 states introduced legislation to adopt an EITC that was either non-refundable or less than the 10% of the federal credit. And of these states, Utah enacted legislation to adopt a 15% non-refundable state EITC that's effective this tax year. And Arkansas and North Dakota both adopted temporary non-refundable credits. And although those tax credits will surely help many families, it's important to understand that it's a refundable credit that's necessary to help the lowest earning working parents. The progress states have been made this year has been both exciting and inspiring. And we know that these actions will improve the lives of infants and toddlers and their families. And I encourage you to explore each state's progress in the state summaries, or to learn much more about policy progress and how states are implementing and funding these policies in the profile sections of the roadmap.